introduction. I'm just giving real thanks. He's here through the assistance of the Ivan Smith Funds Endowment as an Ivan Smith visiting scholar. And we are very honored and happy to have you here, not only because you are so visible now in your work in Africa, but also because we are a water state. And so we actually think we have a lot of connected questions, shall I say. But anyways, I'm just welcoming you after the lecture. We have a reception back in the gallery, and so we can continue any kind of conversation that we'd like. But now I'm welcoming again Joe Addo, who's going to give a short introduction for Kunlé.
I'm not going to give the real introduction either.
I know.
Because I think we all, with the power of the internet, we all know who Kunlé is. But I would like to kind of personalize how I know Kunlé and the context in which he has emerged. I think that's very important, especially for the students who are not here this morning. Kunlé is one of the new voices on the global architecture scene. But what is important is that Kunlé was not trained abroad. He studied in Nigeria, which is very important because most of us kind of cheated a little bit. We're the classic diasporans where we left very early. But Kunlé is very special because I heard about Kunlé when Rem did his experimentation in Nigeria, and you were basically picked by him as a shining star. So as great minds always do, they're able to come into a new context and meet young people who they know are the future voices of their generation. Kunlé is such a person. I met Kunlé personally in Amsterdam many years ago in one of our Arch Africa events, which was hosted by the Prince Class Fund. And it was a great documentary done by Manthia Etiara from New York University and from Senegal. Great filmmaker who has chronicled the story of Maison Tropicale. And, you know, those of you who know the work of Jean Prouvé and his experiments in prefab housing for the French colonial government in the Congo. And this is where I met Kunlé. And there was this immediate kind of kinship which was established because Kunlé has a very curious mind. And he's a Pan-Africanist. He loves Africa. He loves Nigeria, and his work is very telling through his experimentations with not only OMA, but with people like Amechi Ndili and the explorations with the fourth mainland bridge and so forth. So I'm thrilled to be introducing one of Arch Africa's best friends. And I hate the word star architect, but mega star.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thanks. It's a real pleasure to be here. I want to say a big thank you to the University of Florida as a whole for inviting me here. It's my first time here. It's great to be here. It's. I also want to say a special thank you to Donna, Brenda, and the other organizers of the event. It's been a wonderful event. We've had so many speakers, and I think the most interesting thing about the event so far is the multidisciplinary approach to the issues that we're looking at in Africa, and I think that's extremely topical, and which really is the crux of my discussion today. I'm just going to turn the lights down.
If we get the right ones,
Yeah,
they're going to work.
Yeah.
Did I just counteract what you did?
Yeah, perfect.
Oh, yeah.
Is that good?
Okay, great, thank you. Right, so I want to talk about two important things. I think two of the most important challenges of our time. The first is urbanization. I think everyone is very familiar with the issues of urbanization today, and these are the issues it's quite widespread in terms of the impact of urbanization, and particularly in regions in Africa. Part of the significant consequences is the development of slum areas. So that's and poverty and housing shortages and all kinds of issues related to the fact that people are moving. There's a rural to urban migration. The other issue is climate change. Oops, did I just say that? Are we in Florida? Okay. So the C word, the double C word. Yeah. So I mean, it's quite interesting. I mean, the issue of climate change, and I was particularly I was invited to a conference called Sci-Food, I think in 2011, I don't quite remember, with the Googleplex with all kinds of incredible people from all over the world. I was actually the only architect there, and there was a climate change skeptic. I don't remember his name now. He's meant to be very famous, but his issue was not that there was no climate change was not real. I mean, that's like a given fact. His point was that actually the areas that are impacted by climate change, it's sort of developing regions. He particularly mentioned areas like Pakistan, and it's all collateral damage. So it's interesting. That was 2011, and of course, this is an image of New York, which basically is the archetypical image of the development, the conquest of humanity over nature, that we can actually build, where we're strong, we can do these great things. And shortly after that, of course, is this image which you may have seen of Superstorm Sandy, where nearly half of Manhattan was shut down by climate change, by storm. I mean, people have different opinions, but of course, there's a clear correlation between the changing environment and the occurrence. So again, it was a rude awakening that we're not only dealing with that climate change is not only an issue that affects the so-called developing regions, but it's an issue that affects all of us. I just saw this funny clip on Florida. That was funny. My office is called Kunlé. It's an architecture, design, and urbanism practice, and the important things that we try to focus on developing cities. And when I mean that, I mean that both as a process. We're really interested in developing cities, but also regional. We're interested in developing cities. And I think what's ironic is, of course, that in the past, what we used to know, I mean, there used to be that division of developed world and developing cities. And what we're beginning to see is actually almost as if the less developing worlds are now really the developing worlds. They're really becoming the forefront of developments. We're a business practice, but we do have a very strong social and environmental consciousness. People sometimes think these things are very different. I think you can run a business at the same time be socially and environmentally conscious. Kunlé means at home, And that's because I believe the home is the fundamental building block of any society. And of course, that's ultimately the most important part of what we're doing as architects, urbanists, and people, thinkers of tomorrow, is that we are really working for people. It's all about people. I had the privilege of working with Ren Koolhaas, whom I really revere and really admire, because he's been a great thinker, and had the opportunity to work on these great projects all over the world. And 4 years ago, I decided to move forward to face new challenges and bring all the things I had learned into a new region, new territory. And we do a lot of, let's say, sort of high-end work still. At the same time, we're doing buildings, office buildings, and all of these projects, we still inject some degree of social and environmental consciousness, even if they're like somewhat commercial projects in the technical sense of it. However, I think the reason I'm invited here is perhaps because of some of my more socially driven projects, which you may have seen, and I will talk about these 3 projects soon. But the crux of my practice is really based on the fact it's underpinned by this idea of sustainability. We talk about sustainable development, but I really like this definition, which really talks more about responsibility than in Colombia, who's now, I think, the governor. And he said, our most beautiful buildings must be built in our forest areas. I mean, that's a very powerful, forward-thinking sentence right there, that our most beautiful buildings must be built in our forest areas. And I think that's a very transformative approach to how to develop poor communities, how to address the issues of urbanization. So all of these factors have led me to begin to think about the growth and development of regions in Africa, and particularly looking at it from a very broad perspective, looking at the issues of urbanization, which of course you may know that only in the 1950s, nearly 40% of the world lived in cities, and by 2050, I mean, right now more than half of the world's population lives in cities, and by 2050 it's projected that nearly 7% of the world population will live in cities, with most of that agglomeration happening within Africa. So the very basic facts, which everyone knows from elementary school, is that nearly 7% of Earth is covered by water. So then one starts to imagine that just put like 30% of the surface of the Earth that we're kind of struggling with, and there's a whole chunk of 20% right there. And a less perhaps a known fact is that nearly 70% of the world's capital cities are actually by water. All of these are all scattered around. I mean, it's no surprise because, of course, if you look at it historically, cities were settled by water. The first known main city, known as the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia, was settled along the Fertile Crescent. And that's, of course, because there are 2 important factors there. Water allows you to farm, so agriculture is important, and 2, transportation, and just a fertile land, basically. So the establishment of cities, urbanization, humanity, the growth of it has always originally been around water. So a less known fact, again, is that we after with some research discovered is that, again, nearly 70% of the African capitals are actually also by water. At this point, I thought I should write a book, Architecture for the 7%. Now, a bit of a shocking fact, again, is that although Africa is said to be the least responsible for climate change, it's actually the most affected by it. So in a way, my climate change skeptic was absolutely right. There's most of the collateral damage will be happening in these regions, and you see within sort of a high area, a large area of the continent is within the high to extreme high risk zones. So this is a real threat. There's real vulnerability to the issue of the C word. Climate change. When we talk about climate change, we always think about it, from CO2 emissions, something really far-fetched. But these are the kind of images we're beginning to see on a day-to-day basis in African cities, where the most obvious impact is, of course, flooding. There's an increase in rainfall, and there's a lot of flooding, and the streets and the infrastructure is not designed to deal with that. So what's kind of crazy about this image, of course, is that you see on this end, these guys are struggling to get out of that situation, but on this end, these guys are like trying to conquer it. They really think they're driving a submarine. But what is actually more exciting is the fact that these guys are actually really dealing with it. They're already beginning to adapt and take that condition into their own hands, and really, the resiliency of the African people is so incredible. And I think for me, this image really exemplifies the source of inspiration of my work, where I believe that there is a lot of intelligence, resourcefulness within the large areas of the continent, and that we need to look inwards, and where we have those challenges, we will find solutions, and solutions always emerge from those challenges. So this is really, again, see that guy driving his thing, and these guys have, this is probably an abandoned boat somewhere that, and they're just, suddenly it's just become a carnival. On the back of that, in 2011, I launched a research project called the African Water Cities Project, which really investigates the intersection points of issues of rapid urbanization and climate change, which really is about trying to understand the points that on the continent where those two issues really come together. Where are the cities growing rapidly? Where do we have occurrences of flooding? So we began with some very basic mapping, looking at patterns, which I'll expand a lot more later, but looking at net migration patterns, population growth rates, urbanized areas, overlapping those with flood-affected areas, and in a way identifying some cities which really show the points of those intersections. So we identified 20 so-called top 20 African water cities. These are cities that are vulnerable at the same time are important. So they're significant in their growth, and they're vulnerable and at risk. And we've begun looking at Lagos, Dar es Salaam, and Luanda. I've done some basic research, and our ambition is to sort of go across all of these. And these cities might change, so some of the African brothers here, if you don't see a city here, you might, don't be upset. There's room for more. But it's interesting because these it also enlightens us with the fact that, African cities, for most people that have not been, really would think, that have never been to Africa, would think Africa, it's a jungle, basically. That, okay, it's a safari, but actually there are great points of civilization. Of course, the more obvious, like Cape Town in South Africa, all along the coast, Dakar in Senegal, Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire, Angola, Dar es Salaam, all cities around Accra, and of course Lagos in Nigeria. Again, this is an interesting image where only in 2000, May 2000, The Economist released this image, this cover, with talking about Africa as a hopeless continent, and suddenly in 2011, just about 10 years, it is Africa rising. So this immediate jump, also tells us a bit about the impact of urbanization and the impact of the growth of the continent. And suddenly there's a focus, a shift from, a global shift and focus on Africa. And so we decided to, I took a lot more interest in the fact that in trying to understand why this shift is occurring, what's happening. And in most of the presentations today, we've seen different explanations from different presenters of why this is happening. And last year, I had the opportunity to teach a studio at Cornell, where titled Water in the City, which was a research and design studio looking, again, expanding on the idea of African Water Cities project. And the questions that we had were to try and understand really what's causing the growth. Why is Africa developing so quickly? Who are the drivers? Who are the players? Where's the money coming from? Where is it allocated? Really understanding what is causing this and how it is influencing people and the major players. And of course, architecture, as we know in design, was not a tool that was not enough as a device to understand this issue. So we identified what I call 7 decimal factors of development. These are really sort of the drivers of development. And I'll just take it very quickly. The first being demographics, second economics, social politics, infrastructure, morphology, environment, and resources. Now, you'll be very disappointed as architects that the architecture is not on this list. But I think the truth is that architecture is only a tool to design and understand and maybe orchestrate these issues. And the lectures today have shown that really having a multidisciplinary understanding of what's happening globally is the way to practice the profession today. You can't, it's not about design alone. Design is just a tool to think and to orchestrate these issues. Very complex ecosystem that we live in. So really extensive research in very little time, but it's just a conceptual research, I would say. Demographics, you have to, before you begin, it's all about people, like I said. Everything, the drivers of development, it really boils down to people. So we want to know where people are settled, life patterns, the death rates, and of course the population growth all around the continent, and where those overlay with slum prevalences all around the continent. You see a lot of that is happening again along the coast, because of course the coastal areas are the areas that are developing quite rapidly. And what's also causing death. You know, you have to understand the balance between life and death to understand development. And there's a direct correlation between the development in general of cities, countries, of nations with the population growth. I mean, China, all the countries that have developed rapidly have had trends of development. So, what kills people? Influenza, diarrhea, stroke, HIV/AIDS, malaria. What are the causes of death? And of course, a cause of death like malaria, which sounds like, okay, it's a medical issue. If you go back, if you really try to understand the source of the cause of malaria, it's definitely related to water. Mosquitoes breed along water areas, so it is actually an environmental problem. For instance, I mean, these are just very basic research that we've done in Florida with a population of about 20 million people and density also increasing. There's a rapid population increase here also. Economics, second driver of development. We've had discussions around that, and there was a presentation by a Chinese colleague of ours who showed the great things that China is doing. I think it's very true. It's undeniable that the Chinese relationship with Africa is increasing, and it's very, very strong. I'm not going to go into the politics of whether it's right or wrong, but that's the reality. And they are big players, not only in Africa but in the rest of the world. We looked at where the resources are going out of, where the money is coming in, foreign direct investments, GDP growth rates, GDP indexes, and where the money is being put into kinds of infrastructure projects like the gentleman showed us today. Hotels, for instance, the hotel chain. So you have to understand what people are, where people with the money are investing and what they're investing into. Architecture is, in a way, the more we understand the ecology of or the ecosystem of all of these issues, the better we're placed to influence them in a way. This is for some information on Florida. I didn't realize it had so many oranges. So good. I really like having orange juice. It's like the only thing you can drink all across the continent, all across the world. Like if you travel a lot, just have a glass of orange juice and fine. So, so of course, the kinds of things that are drivers of economy in Florida. Social politics, we've heard a lot. I think Ufo gave a really good presentation on Joburg and the kind of political situations, the political drivers of a city like that. History is very important. I think we've got a lot of presentations on that. Also, the patterns in Africa, the divisions, the areas of conflicts. Understanding the cycles of government. In a place like Florida, ethnicity, and the fourth, infrastructure. Very quickly, I'll take you through. We know the impact of the cellular phone communications, how that is probably in the development of the African countries, how water, of course, the location of, say, ports, that makes, is a very big driver of development. the relationship between the ports and how the goods are being moved around. And of course, in a place like Florida, where there's a lot of, the road network is increasing, and I just heard that there are 15 million registered motor vehicles. That's quite a lot, almost 1 to 1. And morphology. So, morphology, essentially, this is a physical constraint or physical opportunity for the development of cities. And if you look at the development of cities on a sort of macro scale, you'd see that there's almost a pattern that is actually almost predictable. When you look at London, how it's grown radially, you look at New York, maybe linearly, it's all along either mountains, water edges. It's almost like an organism that grows. And if you understand the relationship between the morphology of a city or of an area, then you would also be a lot better equipped. For instance, I heard there was a discussion around about Kigali, and the mountain areas. These are constraints, and it's just there will be a pattern that is almost predictable, that you can actually tell for how the city would develop. The fifth or sixth point is the environment. A very important thing, how the weather patterns, of course, the climate, the quality, and how the world is, of course, this then goes back to good old C word. And, one of the things that my students discovered is that because of the issue of the global warming, there's a shift, sort of a southeast shift in the intertropical climate zone, which means that the climate pattern is actually shifting from, so we're going to get a lot more rainfall in these areas, in areas like Tanzania, so there's going to be a lot of change happening there. This is Florida. This is an image of what would happen if all the ice caps melted. This is a bit far-fetched, but no fear. But again, the reality is that this is happening already. I'm sure you probably know about this much more than I do, but these are day-to-day realities that we're beginning to confront. Finally, resources. And of course, again, this is one of the main drivers of development. The fact that, for instance, there's oil, people coming to try to get oil from different parts of the world, whether it's agriculture, all kinds of resources that the nations battle for. And of course, water is a big resource, and in fact, we underestimate the fact that water as a resource is a big issue, and we might be seeing a lot more conflicts around water in the future as opposed to oil. Florida, with a lot of groundwater supplies, actually 9% of drinking water comes from here, so that's a good resource here. So again, the DECIMA is really about the African Water Cities project, a way to look at it, and in a way, if you break it down, the first four issues are issues around rapid urbanization, and the last three are issues that's around climate change. And the students produced a booklet which is yet to be published. We're working on the final refinements, but this is a very quick, thick book, which really has all these mappings and information that we gathered, and also all these rankings of different African countries, for different issues that we've outlined. For instance, the GDP GDP growth rates, GDP per capita, all of that information is being ranked, and in one glance you can tell that, of course, Nigeria is currently the country with the highest GDP, but yes, obviously, Equatorial Guinea is the country with the highest GDP per capita. Equatorial Guinea is the highest GDP per capita. They have a lot of oil with little people. So again, Equatorial Guinea is perhaps an attractive place for architecture and business. Okay, so I'll just take you very quickly through the 3 projects that I think somewhat exemplify some of this way of thinking and addressing issues of architecture. The first is the 4th Mainland Bridge and the master plan, which is a project that I did while at OMA, and I kind of think of it as a transitional project because it was the project Africa or in Nigeria, well, not in Nigeria specifically. Well, there are 2 projects, but this particularly very interesting for me in sort of thinking about how to address issues. Set in Lagos with a huge population growth, rapid population growth, the city again, growing in that sort of pattern, very, very predictable around its sort of morphology. It's currently about 16 million people on a very small footprint, and projected to be maybe 24 million in the coming years. Lagos is the 2nd most populous city in Africa, and it's actually settled around, of course, the western coast of Africa, with most of its developments happening sort of in a linear pattern along the coast here. And there's a peninsula along this edge with the growth, where the growth of the city is expanding on that side, and the city is going again on this with a big body of water, like cutting right through its heart. So technically, there's this pinch point here where the idea is that when the city is connected at that point, it would allow circulation around, and that technically, in fact, the heart of the city would really be a body of water. This is an image of Lagos from many years ago. Conditions have improved, but I still like to show this image because it's shocking. But it's also the reality of what the urban agglomeration of a place like that is, where everything seems extremely chaotic. It's really full of energy. It's that point where people, infrastructure, economy, all of these things just sort of coincide. Marketplaces, bus stops, traffic, everything. You get to Lagos, it's really, really an energetic area. So looking at the bridge the point of connection. So we had a project. The project was to design this bridge to make this connection, and so I sort of looked around what's happening in the city already, and this is the kind of way people already appropriate infrastructure. They have bridges, and then people just use the underside of the bridge for commercial purposes. So for me, it was about learning from the environment, looking at what people are already doing. And going back to that pattern, you see there's this sort of congestion that always happens here. So Lagos is always extremely congested. There's traffic because it goes in one direction. People going to work in the morning and coming back, and then struggling to get across. And suddenly, if this place were to get connected, almost like a blood vessel, there'll be a release of pressure and would allow the city to grow in that direction. And again, then this part of the city, the heart of the city becomes a body of water. And the idea was to connect those 2 pinch points with a bridge and create a hub, which is a new city center. And that bridge was really the main project. And and the bridge was conceived the bridge as a 2-level bridge, which essentially the top was for cars and the bottom was for Lagos Life. And it was inspired again by seeing what people are already doing and looking very critically at how actually what seems to be very chaotic on the streetscape, that when you look at it very closely to the sort of untrained eye, it looks like, okay, there's a lot of chaos. But when you begin to analyze it very carefully, you realize that, well, that there's a street level, people like selling tomatoes are actually quite organized in this linear fashion. People selling clothes are really right here. The trash is put along the street side. There's everything is organized in actually in a linear fashion based on the very little infrastructure that they have. So there's actually organization in what seems chaotic. So the idea was, to understand how to, read into this pattern and use it as a way of creating a new form of occupying the bridge, occupying the infrastructure, creating infrastructure that is not only for cars but also for people, just the way they live. So this is the bridge, which conceptually is that you reorganize this activity onto 2 levels, to sort of sanitize it. You create a separation between pedestrian and then so top for cars, bottom for Lagos Life. There's a landing spot for the hub, and you have trams, bicycle lanes, coffee shops. Literally a street life where we even imagined social activities at that level. Second project is, of course, the one that most people might be very familiar with, and it's really it's a project that has really changed the way I see architecture, and I see people, and I see people living in an urban environment. Again, set in Lagos, where right in this city center that I have mentioned is a location right there where a community of nearly 100,000 people have settled for nearly 100 years, it's said. And it's an amazing place where I think, if most people have actually bypassed in Lagos. If you're in Lagos, you drive by, you never sort of pay attention to it. But I was curious. It was at the time I was trying to understand or study affordable housing, and I was looking for what would consider the cheapest dwelling. The least, the basic fundamental dwelling in the city. And it occurred to me that, wow, these people living in this, for lack of a better word, slum, actually may have created a typology of building which may be the cheapest dwelling. So again, Makoko the community is called Makoko. It's a fishing and sewing community with which actually provides Lagos with nearly a third of its fish supply. It's got almost no roads or no land in the kind of modern, typical way we understand infrastructure. Water is actually the only infrastructure in Makoko. And for me, for most people, again, you see they consider it a slum. But the first time I went there, I was so shocked. At the same time, very inspired, and it immediately occurred to me that this might be the resourcefulness and innovativeness of people there might just be a key to a new type of architecture and urbanism on water in African cities. So it's a it's a settlement with nearly 100,000 people, with all these little houses just built around, built on stilts. You know, it's very populated, very dense, over 68 people living there, and everyone has a little boat where they sort of get around. And when the, I mean, there are lots of settlements on water all around the world, and Amsterdam is one, which I partly live in, and I think it's also something that has inspired me to see Makoko differently. And I call Amsterdam the category 1 water city because, of course, you can drive a car, you can walk, you can get on a bike, and then there's a canal, there are buildings all on land. And if you've been to Venice, you would know that Venice, you can't drive around Venice, you can't get on a bike, you only can walk or you get on a boat. So Venice is a category 2 water city in my sort of definition. And Makoko is an extreme condition, which I call a category 3 water city, where you can't walk, you really can't drive, the only thing you can do is get on a boat. I mean, you're either in your house or you're on water. And it's an extreme condition of urbanization, but again, a condition where we have to really start to think about what kind of civilization. I mean, we walk on land, that's a form of civilization. I think when we start thinking about people living on water, that is also a totally different kind of civilization. I've actually heard that there are people living on trees, so that might be a third thesis project for some people. Yeah. And Makoko is not the only community on water. In fact, there are hundreds of such communities scattered around coastal African coast. This is Gambia in Benin, which is also quite known. There's Padiuk in Senegal, who's lives in Ghana, Sud in South Sudan, and again, this is Makoko. This is really what people define as a home in Makoko. And like I said to you, I really believe the home is the fundamental building block of any society. And for a place like Makoko, this gentleman here in his bright red shirt has just a home. That's all he needs. And you multiply that, and you will see how this simple, what seems quite chaotic, actually has what seems to be sufficient for him. He's got his 5 kids. 6. Someone spotted another one. Probably, yeah, maybe even 7 inside. Yeah, but that's really So he's got that. He's got that's an open bathroom right there. So you look at it, it's quite chaotic. But when you really start to read into it, you see that there's some logic in it. It's an open bathroom. This is his kitchen. This is wood where that he burns to cook. And that's his limousine there. So it's a poor area. It's by no means trying to fetishize this condition. It's a very challenging situation for him, but he actually has the basic things to live. And again, this is shopping in Makoko. This is how people get around. This is this is your mall. Everyone sells. You literally just sit in your house on the stilts, and everything just gets carried around, gets traded. So there's a vibrant economy in the community, and there are definitely challenges. We're not saying this is all nice. In fact, those are the first things that you're encountered with when you visit Makoko. You find that the quality of the condition of sanitation of building is really poor. Housing condition is really bad. The houses built on stilts, falling apart, the roof, all kinds of things. It's very far from perfect, but there's something to learn from it. Sanitation is really bad there. They don't have enough schools, they don't have enough facilities for the children, and infrastructure really poor. This is, trying to get water. They have tanks that's connected to groundwater, which sometimes get contaminated. They've got all these challenges. At the same time, I see opportunities. I see how they have become extremely resourceful to create what is actually quite advanced in a way. They have a huge sewing industry. They use the water as infrastructure to float in logs of wood. So they have this huge sewing community in the area. A lot of the logs and wood that's used for the building industry is from Makoko area. They've managed to create a huge community, with all these buildings actually in what seems chaotic. I don't have those slides here, but it's actually also quite organized, just based on a pattern of repetition of very basic principles. They've got agriculture. They've developed a system where they plant these reeds and they create a habitat for fish, and after a few months the fish grow and they harvest. So it's aquaculture in the environment, and of course low energy. They get around by boats. They don't even consume a lot of fossil fuels. At the same time, as architects, we must enjoy those moments of beauty where we also see the opportunities for great scenery. I mean, it's a place where, even though it's extremely impoverished, it's every moment is just so beautiful to capture in photography. It's just it's a photographer's haven. So when I visited, like I said, I was really confronted by this situation, and I was asked by the community if I could help build an extension to an existing school, which was subject to flood, which was always getting flooded because it was built on reclaimed land. And I said, well, that's I would love to help, and if I can learn from how you've been able to create this entire community almost out of nothing, and if I can improve on that, then we have a deal. And they said, yeah, that's fantastic. So I literally just said, look, let me understand how they really build, how they, the kind of materials and the kind of ways that they managed to create this typology of housing, and could we improve on that? Right there, right at the time I began the project, coincided with a very tense political situation where the government of Lagos State decided that they were going to clear them out. Of course, as the practice of slum clearance, as we know in many parts of the world, they just said, okay, this is, it's a bad place, it's an eyesore, we want to clear them out, and they began demolishing it. And thousands of people were displaced at the time, and it became quite a big issue. One person, one of the leaders of the community, was actually shot dead by law enforcement agents that literally went brutally, like cutting down the buildings. And it was a moment again for us to then become extremely proactive, and we began this sort of design and research and design development. So working with the community, one of the first things I did was really listening to the local expert. This guy has built 50 to 100 of those houses. He literally sat me down and taught me how the kind of wood they use, the kind of connections that they build with, how they nail in everything. It was a really great period of learning from the environment, understanding exactly, they know the type of wood that would survive in water, but even more interesting is that they know not just the type of wood, but what part of the wood would actually survive in water. So there's a lot of knowledge that we gain from them. And being also having access to experts all over the world, particularly in Amsterdam or in the Netherlands, with the expertise on water issues. There was that collaboration with experts locally and internationally. And a lot of community engagements. We began looking at design options, and the solution was actually quite simple. Ultimately, was that we looked at how they built, understanding the local technology, then trying to really understand the challenges that they face, which is the fact that because of the increase in rainfall, and the fact that they are built on stilts and their position is sort of fixed, they get flooded from time to time. And so the idea is that how do we create a building which was not susceptible to flooding, which would adapt to the changing levels and rise in water. And the solution was really to create a flotation device, because it did two things. One, of course, it adapts to the changing tidal conditions. The other thing is that it actually liberated us from having columns or having a foundation that would have to sit in a very weak ground condition that we didn't know about. And I think one of the first things I tried to do was do a soil test. And I sent someone there, and the person came back with a price for doing a soil test that was more than the cost of building the project. So I knew that wasn't a solution at all. So, but this liberated us from the ground condition that is really poor. So, I mean, the solution is really sort of a hybrid where, it's essentially a triangular structure, which, of course, takes from the roof form. And a triangle is, of course, the sort of most stable and most rigid form, and perhaps, particularly a pyramid, because the center of gravity is relatively low. So, for stability and flotation is really perfect. And, you have the balance, the proportion is really right for flotation. So that was the idea for a triangular structure, which allowed us to really just do it. We just built it. And that's of course the image of the school completion. And I'll just tell you very quickly how some of the parts came together. At some point we were looking for, okay, so we have this idea, build a floating structure, the proportions should be of this nature. How do we create that flotation device? We looked at different solutions, from steel barges, concrete platforms. I mean, a floating building is not a new thing, particularly. It's just we needed to find a solution that was for that environment, and we had different kind of criteria for the selection. And while we're looking for that, I was looking for a solution. I just realized, the answer was right there. It was really right there. And this is one of the most interesting things about the project. And perhaps again, going back to my point, is that I really believe that every problem contains or suggests its solution. And while trying to find how to create a flotation device for the building, I just saw these kids and I'm like, that's it. That really is it, because they're already doing it. So, we literally, and then it occurred to me that, of course, Lagos is a port city. We've got all these barrels that have been used for different supplies of products, and they are, in abundance, and they're now being resold. So they're recycled plastic barrels. What do you do with all this plastic? Why don't we use it? Some of it are just in the community already. So we strapped 16 of them together, and literally the kids just jumped on it. We created this flotation device, and it was really amazing to see that even I wasn't as comfortable on it as they were. They were playing, soccer, and they were so happy. But their sense of stability is very different. They live in environments that what they do repeat. So what we did was strap 16 of those modules together and create a 10 by 10 platform, which of course became this sort of 100 square meter floating real estate. And looking again right within the community, their expertise in sort of bringing timber, logs of wood. We just use the same material and use it to create the structural frame. So this is the site. This is, of course, the building there under construction, and you see that's a raw material that we use. And this actually is the remnants of the foundations of the buildings that were demolished, that were cut over. So again, this is a very interesting image of sort of Africa rising. And created this structure and did a lot of serious scientific tests. That's a tsunami. Kids do not try this at home. But it actually works. You see, there's a lot of, even in that, there's a lot of stability. But more seriously, we had support from some of the best naval architects in the world who built like 100-foot yachts, to do scientific tilt balance calculations to be sure that we're not being irresponsible. And the first time I had a meeting with them, so this is just perfect. I mean, the proportion is just perfect. It makes a lot of sense, and the science is very simple. An object floats because it displaces the amount of water it falls to its weight. So if you want to float an object of 100 kilograms, you just need to create a device, a flotation a device that will displace 100 kilograms of water. It's just that simple. So essentially, the barrels, 256 barrels, with a lot of redundancy, can support over 25 tons, with even half of it being redundant. So there's a lot of redundancy. Even if some of the barrels get displaced or are empty or they get punctured, we just take them out, we replace them. I mean, it's almost quite simple and straightforward at the same time. Very basic. So this is the structure, the base structure, the A-frame. The A-frame was also very useful in the fact that, because it's a triangle, you don't need a scaffolding. You just literally climb up on the sides, so you don't need any kind of infrastructure or to build it. And these members that were all, we designed it so that it's all modular. I mean, it's all, you can almost flat pack it, basically. So you have all the colors represent different members that are similar. Even before the structure was completed, just like the kids, the adults also jumped on it. And this was a Christmas party in 2012. This was their Christmas party, and they had a really great time. So it's a very simple structure with the bottom open as a play area, public space, and there's an enclosed classroom area and a semi-enclosed top level. This is an image taken by Iwan Ban showing it from above with boats. It's almost like a magnet, really attracts a lot of people. It's a close up. It's a building that is far from perfect, and I'm actually quite happy to say that because it's not about the detail, it's not about perfection, it's about how the whole is actually greater than some of the parts. It's a prototype, it's a test, it's experimental. We're looking at creating improvements in the next phases, but the impact is already having within the community is quite a lot, and sort of it sits right at the edge here of the community. This is Lagos, the rest of the city, the bridge. Everyone sees this community. So it's a new sort of landmark. It's a new face. It's like an icon of hope for the community. And suddenly, by proposing this to the government, we said to them, well, look, why not think about this community in a different way? Why don't we look at harnessing these opportunities and using this as a form of building, maybe it's not just schools, hospitals, housing, creating a new type of infrastructure. And the government, they're very resistant to change, so from the conception of the project, I kept sending letters and they never really paid attention until, of course, it was on CNN, and then calls started coming through that, oh gosh, what did that you're causing an embarrassment in the States, and all kinds of things. I was almost a persona non grata in the city, for the government, at the same time with other people saying that this is a very laudable project. And over the last 2 years, they've sent over 50 people assessing the building from the different ministries, coming almost like spies sometimes, taking notes and how does it work. And finally, we're now making headway because all the assessments have been quite positive. And I just had a meeting with the state government, and we are looking at how this can be one of the catalysts or stimulants for, as an innovation bed for thinking about houses on water. Because until this, there's no policy around living or building on water. So this really is sort of a shift in your thinking. And perhaps, when we do get an approval, formal approval, because it bridges, it operates within a very small gap. It's not, they're like, oh, you didn't get an approval for it. I'm like, well, it's not quite a building. You really need an approval to build a boat. So it's a new typology of building that has to be put into policy. And there's been a lot of publicity around it, which I'm sure is why some of you are attending the lecture, and it's been reasons for Ban Ki-moon on the dreaded C word. I've had an opportunity of presenting in different parts of different colleges, and there's been a lot of interest, attraction, tourism, and that's not me by the way, so it's really generated a lot of interest. And I think for me, what's important about it is that it's not you're wondering what makes it so interesting. I guess perhaps it captures a lot of imagination, but for me, it's that it's a building that was built. It's a 220 square meter building on 3 floors, built out of local material, no farther than 50 meters, built by these 8 local carpenters with nothing more complicated than a hand drill. It's like, it's not really about inventing something completely new. It's about really looking at what's existing and recomposing it into something totally different, that has different value. Women, it has become like a spot for markets, and the kids still floating in a plastic bag. So the idea, of course, is that that today we have a condition like that in one building, and that in the future we could multiply. It's not only in the same form, but in different. Everyone is invited to think about a typology of building using the same kind of issues, addressing it locally to create a new form of architecture and urbanism on water, where course, through sort of incremental, you can add, together to create a little community, and perhaps that community can be scaled. By no means, this is not a perfect image, and we actually hope it doesn't look like this, but it's the easiest Photoshop thing to just copy and paste. But at least it gets the conversation going that there could be a new form of architecture and urbanism that really looks at an environment, local environment, learns from it, and improves upon it. And what's interesting is, of course, a city like Venice is the first settlers are, it's called Kunlé. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. The Italians might help out here. But the original settlers of Venice are actually called the lagoon dwellers. So in a way, several hundreds of years ago, they were no different from the people of Marco. And today, Venice is a place where we all try to visit. Amsterdam, of course, the ideas of settlement, where the culture of Amsterdam, was really built around in the 16th century, as a port city with a network of canals to drain the area. And today, we have classical concerts being held on the canal. Culture, urban water culture has really increased. So, the last project I would show is something in conception. It's called Chikopo Radio. It is a project that is at the furthermost point of Nigeria. It's about 600 kilometers in Port Harcourt. And it's a very different project, and we set our ambitions a little higher on this one. Because Port Harcourt is a city, it's an oil-rich city, it's a very industrialized area where affected the use of steel. It's a very, it's a city with a lot more educated communities and technically competent communities. And again, the communities there are lots of communities residing along the coastal areas, which, of course, there are just young, bright, really, the power of the amount of intelligence and talent that I saw in people in Port Harcourt was really impressive. And again, a couple of years ago, the government decided they were going to clear out all of these sort of informal settlements and begin to, because urbanization, pressure of development, the pressure of, okay, we want to have big buildings, we want to have Dubai, we want to have, so they decided they were going to clear them. So they began with some of the demolition, and at some point that also stopped. And this particular community in Okrika, which resides along a creek, they decided they needed to do something. They needed to show that they were also a people that could fend for themselves, that they were not really, they are a people, and people live where apparently it seems like a place for nobody. So their settlement is along the coast. It's a community of several thousand of people, and historically they have a culture of digging out some of the mud. They've always lived on by water, and their forefathers have had a very close relationship with water. But for some reason, they have just, the new generation has just continued to expand by building and reclaiming land, creating a lot of sort of waste, sanitation problems. They're constantly just reclaiming land, using waste as landfill, and you even see like actually wealthy, so-called wealthy people within this sort of community. So it's a very weird condition, which is probably I mean, for me, it's a place where, you know, it's almost schizophrenic, because you find very, very talented people. I mean, very, very poor people, very unhealthy conditions, and at the same time, extremely talented people that are that have huge issues and huge interest in their own history. So this is, I'll show you a very short clip of some of my experience.
You see this place where they are? Now water before. Where our papa they come down and fish at people. They come carry this mud, big mud, come stone here. As you see this house, they dig deep inside the ground. All here now money they take by, all here now mangrove. They cut am. This place where you see so. Now here they come. Now here, my mama and my papa.